For any player skilled enough to play around the threat of specific kinds of minion removal, good enough to understand the importance of reshuffles to the robots faction, and capable of planning ahead a little bit, but who doesn't yet know every single card in the game well enough to play the Geeks to their full potential, robots are probably the strongest overall faction in the game of Smash Up. Geeks and aliens may outclass the robots in 1v1, but as soon as you add even a third player, Geeks and robots are pretty equal, aliens fall a significant amount behind, and on top of that, it requires a lot of game knowledge to get to the point where the Geeks can punch at an equal weight to robots in a 3-player game, let alone 4-player, where I don't think the Geeks ever become equal. Simply put, this faction has the raw burst potential to bust through a lot of defensive setups, but it doesn't require an excessive amount of game knowledge to do so, and it isn't as fiddly as the All-Stars, so factions like Geeks or aliens are going to be less able to stick some sort of stick in the gears somewhere and prevent it from working. The robots tend to work in most situations, even against really good defense. Let's start with the biggest of big game, and that is robots versus Geeks in 1v1. In order to understand what you need to do to win this as a robots player, you have to understand what the Geeks really want to do to you. And there's the obvious threat that they could control minion a microbot fixer and turn this into a huge play, or they can Will Wheaton your tech center off you making a huge play and trying to reload, prevent your reload, get ahead on another base, and start rolling on that base and set you back. These are good plays for the Geeks to make, but these plays tend to lead to a game where both players have dynamic chances to win. What the Geeks would really love to do is shut down your reshuffles by control minioning or band listing your second microbot reclaimer. Keep in mind, this tactic doesn't really apply in multiplayer games with at least 3 players, because you're not likely to get far enough in your deck to reach the point where the robots start rolling an incredible amount because of those reshuffles. If the Geeks can make sure that you aren't able to get your fixers and alpha back into your deck, they can start calculating every possible hand you could have that could threaten to break and win a base in a given position, and then anytime they have another band list left over, they band list the main threat card before playing their minion, observe, okay, this is how much power this robot's player could play next turn, and they play a completely safe play that sets them up as well as possible. Then they break a base on the next turn, and it doesn't matter how well you're playing as a robots player. Once you're in that sort of vise, you're unlikely to be able to get out of it because the Geeks can literally cover all your possible options. So there's a few ways you can try to avoid the Geeks doing this to you. The first and most obvious is to play so fast and so aggressively that the Geeks are forced to burn a control minion, burn their Will Wheaton, burn their force of will defensively to try to survive in the early game, and they aren't able to try and put you in this lock. A Geeks player sitting on their back foot for the entire game is a Geeks player who probably, assuming you're not facing Elder Geeks, doesn't have the time and the spare moves to neuter your deck at the same time. Also, a Geeks player who had to use control minion on something else is a Geeks player who can't deny Microbot Reclaimer reshuffles as long as you play the Microbot Reclaimer on the turn. As soon as you draw it, you play it right away to make sure that they never get a chance to band list, unless the Geeks player actually fishes for it and hopes it's one of the last 2 cards you drew in your hand. And a good Geeks player may do this to you if you're trying to prevent them from denying the reshuffle, but it's still a pretty low percentage play, and you should be fairly safe. The next possibility is to pick a partner faction that denies this particular strategy. Innsmouth and Rockstars are both normally horribly weak to Geeks, but in the case of robots, they draw the banned lists away from the robots and prevent the Geeks from preventing the robots' reshuffles. If the Geeks focus their defensive cards on stopping the robots, either Innsmouth's ability to sift through the deck three cards at a time, that was lovely, or the Rockstar's very large number of ways to trigger a reshuffle will just prevent this banned list strategy from working at all. Ghosts also tends to cover this strategy a bit because the Ghosts have extremely threatening ideas of their own, and Ghosts tend to do well against Geeks. Ghosts also are a fantastic robots partner. They were a very good robots partner before they got a Titan. With the Titan, they now... Ghosts' hands can do incredible things in most of the situations where robots' hands can't do something amazing, and because of that, it's a deck that's just really, really hard to stop. And while I haven't tried this myself, you can also try to slow down the Geeks and run them out of banned list time by playing a Madness faction, either Cthulhu Tea or Elder Things. This should work even against Elder Geeks if you get Cthulhu Tea as your partner faction, because Cthulhu tends to trump Elder Things in a Madness battle now, but I'm not so sure I'd want to take Elder Robots up against Cthulhu Geeks. That's likely to be a situation where their Titan comes out, undoes your Madness spam, and Geeks gets to play its normal game. Other than that, you're mostly going to find yourself wanting to rush as hard as possible and play your Reclaimers quickly so that the Geeks don't have a chance to neuter your deck, and they have to focus their banned list and focus their control minion on some immediate threat rather than on killing your endgame off so that they can get a 90% winning endgame and just sort of make your entire deck look stupid. Robots are maybe a little worse off versus aliens than you might think looking at the faction ratings. Just against a fully defensive aliens deck that isn't even really attempting to play a proper game of Smash Up, the robots' extra plays add a little bit less speed than they would in a usual game where the robots can break a base, get a reshuffle, break another base, and, play a normal game of Smash Up. The robots are fairly resistant to beam up and crop circles and the other aliens bounce, but Terraform will still kick them in the nuts. Probably worse than many other factions because the robots had a bigger set of power in play before watching that beautiful base turn into a ninja's base and ending up behind 1 point on it. And Disintegrate is pretty good against the robots, being able to do things like slap a fixture Reclaimer on the bottom of the deck. After the aliens, we get to Cthulhu Tea, and this is a good matchup for the robots. The robots like playing against Cthulhu Tea because they have only 2 actions in their deck, and they have all the time in the world to return a Madness every single turn, because the way Cthulhu works with its Titan is it passes off a Madness every single turn. The robots also provide enough power that if their partner faction has a Titan, the robots are pretty good at kicking Cthulhu out of play, and every time you kick Cthulhu out of play, that's basically 1 victory point lost by the Cthulhu player, because they're going to draw 2 more Madness cards as a result of bringing out their Titan again. It's true, they may manage to get rid of all these Madness anyway, but it's still good to force them to replay the Titan. And after that, we get to Kitty Cats, which is pretty much exactly as you'd expect. And I don't think there's any super important wrinkles to facing Kitty Cats with robots. Robots v Dragons. 2 random partner factions. Dragons are normally going to win this matchup because the robots' only minion removal tool is Microbot Guard. This requires a bunch of stuff already in play. So whenever an Imperial Dragon drops down, that's a bunch of guaranteed cards, unless the robots can completely ignore that base somehow. When you give the dragons a bunch of extra cards, they tend to draw more ruins, more flank attacks, more great worms, and they're able to get enough extra points that they only really need to steal 1 base with some combination of Wyvern and specials in order to win the game. Dragons usually have the better end of this matchup. If, as robots, you have a chance to pick a partner faction to get around this, however, most Dragons decks can be beaten by robot ninjas, because Infiltrate takes care of the ruins, and Seeing Stars and Tiger Assassin take care of Imperial Dragon to stop the dragons from snowballing, and Assassination and Ninja Master are there for Great Worm. And between that, the dragons won't have enough of their anti-swarm cards survive to actually beat a robots deck. Exception to this is dragon zombies, who you cannot take care of through removal because you cannot keep Great Worm dead and you cannot keep Imperial Dragon dead. In order to beat zombie dragons or some other similar dragon decks, like, say, Cthulhu Tea Dragons, would also fall in this category, as might Warrior Dragons. I'm not sure. It's been a while since I played Dragon Warriors. These other decks, most other decks that you can't removal your way through, you're going to want to race your way through. And Ghost Robots is your best deck for... Ghosts are just your best partner faction for bashing through these kinds of Dragons decks. Even if you don't have the partner faction, it's your best reasonable partner that you can get. If you do have, it's even better. Aliens would be an even better answer, but alien robots taking, the second and third best factions in 1v1, that's kind of overkill. Something like teddy bears would also work against zombie dragons. I'm not so sure I would want to play teddy bears against most other dragons decks, though, because zombie dragons will specifically get better and better over the course of the game, and you don't really have a way to stop it from snowballing if the game lasts long enough. In a game with at least 3 players, I don't think the robots have any huge matchup issues against specific partner factions. It's a lot easier to play against Imperial Dragon, and the Geeks have other concerns in terms of when they timed their banned lists, as well as the fact that the games aren't long enough to get you into a position where you end up neutered by banned list. So you don't have these particular considerations so much. The main thing I need to mention for multiplayer is just don't expose your fixers or your zap bots to removal when you don't have to. Try to lead with your hoverbots especially because you don't know how much power you're going to get out of them. Lead with your warbots, drop your nuke bot somewhere, and just save big bursts for when you're ready to convert a base with them. Or get so much power on a base that you know you're going to be able to get first, and the player to your left really can't justify not breaking the base in exchange for a second or third place unless they blatantly kingmake for someone else. If you play like that, most groups will most players will accept the fact that they have a really good deal for second place or a really good deal for third place, break the base and give you your points. So I really think the removal is the main thing you need to worry about in multiplayer, rather than there's this specific partner faction that gives the robots problems, because there really isn't a counter in multiplayer. Finally, I'm going to talk about a few different possible partners for the robots. Robot Geeks is exactly as broken as you'd expect, and given how strong the two factions are individually, nobody should ever obtain this deck in a draft anyway, so it really doesn't matter that it's broken as all hell. Alien robots are probably about as good as you would expect based on the decks, but honestly, I've only played them in 6 games, and they're something I would mostly pick if it was a 2-player draft in 1v1 with everything available, and I was second player, and I needed to block off the possibility of facing Alien Geeks and the possibility of facing Robot Geeks. So they're only really interesting as a forced pick for the second player in a draft situation that probably shouldn't occur anyway because it's not terribly interesting. For the Titans, Ghosts with their Titans are an absolutely fantastic robots partner. I think right now they're sitting at 8 straight games won for me in 1v1. I haven't taken them into multiplayer yet, but Ghosts are a lot better with Cream Puff Man than they were without it, and they were already a fantastic robots partner. And Cream Puff Man tends to fire off in situations where the robots didn't have a great hand for doing robots things. So all in all, rave about Ghost Robots. It's a great deck. Time Travelers has become a much better robots partner than it used to because Time Box gives you an extra 2-power minion play. And you can use this extra play before using your main play to play a Fixer or Reclaimer. When you play it as the first minion you play each turn, you get an extra minion play. And now, alright, now I get my Fixer in play and I have 2 unrestricted minion plays that I can play anywhere this turn. That's got to be good, and it's really good for the attack, and it combines really well with the fact that you always have a jumper with which you can end a Zapbot chain. That was about take number 4 on saying that sentence. If you're playing on the app or with just core set for other reasons, Robot Wizards have some significant synergy between them. The Titan works nicely with robots. I don't fully understand why the combo is good, but it is better than the sum of its parts. There's also a couple very well-known partners for robots in Teddies and Zombies. Robot Teddies are pretty broken, but they're also pretty one-dimensional. So they're one of those decks that will totally slaughter most things most of the time, and when they don't work, they can sometimes implode spectacularly. Either way, they're a deck that's going to feel broken, whether they work or not. I tend to think they're not a very fun deck to play against, but your mileage may vary. Robot Zombies, I'm actually going to say that this deck is not as good as most players think it is. The thing is, it's made, if you've got at least 3 players in the game, Robot Zombies are made from at least two of the three best parts that you could make a deck from. And if you are not experienced enough to make Geeks really, really good, Robot Zombies are the 2 best factions in multiplayer stuck in the same deck. You would expect total domination from this, but what you actually get is a deck that wins by a ridiculous margin when it does win, and occasionally just sort of has a dud game where it does nothing. In 1v1, the deck is actually, I think, pretty clearly worse than the sum of its parts, because you end up with a deck that has one mode, straightforward, doesn't have much of a way to pull on the brakes, and so when it doesn't get the right hand, when it doesn't just win by momentum, it tends to get outplayed a lot. And I also don't enjoy playing Robot Zombies because I feel like it's hard to make really good plays as a Robot Zombies player. Either the deck plays itself and randomly wins the game, or the deck doesn't quite work, and it doesn't feel like there's a lot of skillful plays that a player can make to bail Robot Zombies out of a bad slot. So, yeah, totally play Robot Teddies for the lulz and run over some things with it. Robot Zombies, if you get it in random selection, you're probably going to just win the game. In multiplayer, in 1v1, it can do a surprising job of just sort of tripping all over itself occasionally, and on other games, it will win by a mile. I also suspect Cthulhu T robots and Elder robots might be fantastic decks, but they also could be not nearly as good as I expect they are, and I just haven't had time to get to them yet. So these 2 might be interesting decks for you to investigate at some point. And of course, Robot Plants won the first World Championship, and as far as I know, may have also collected other tournament wins since then. One of the crazy things this deck can do is it can either kill a Sprout or use Venus Mantrap's talent to bring out Fixer or Reclaimer or search for Alpha, and this starts all sorts of craziness. Robot Plants is a crazy fast rush deck, and it works very well.